Hello and welcome to the Miko Bits show, and I'm your host, Miko Bits. This is really your place if you're finding it hard to keep up with DeFi, Bitcoin, and blockchain. It seems like a full-time job sometimes, so if so, please feel free to subscribe. I do answer all comments, so if you have comments or questions about the show, just use the comments below. So today I have an exciting episode for you. I have Amrit and Michael, who are principals at Zilliqa, and Zilliqa is a novel layer 1 chain, so it's absolutely kind of a deep infrastructure for blockchain. And it's going to be, I think, exciting to explore both the properties, the unique differentiation of the layer 1, as well as the ecosystem. So I think those are the exciting parts to unpack with this. So, as with all of my shows, it's an opinion and information show. So it's not intended to be investment advice. So if you are looking for investment advice, seek a duly licensed professional. So without any further ado, here is Michael and Amrit.
Hello, Miko.
Hello. Hi.
Just a quick viewer's note. I do have the names reversed on the screen. So the gentleman on your left is Amrit and the gentleman on the right is Michael. So just to clarify for everyone viewing. So would love to just get a quick intro, first of all, just to really get, maybe Amrit, you can go first and talk about sort of, your background and your role in the Zilliqa ecosystem. And, and then we'll do the same with Michael.
Sure. So, hello everyone. My name is Michael. Sorry, I'm confused now with the names there now. My name is Amrit. My background is in research. So, I studied in India where I did mathematics, and then I moved over to France where I did engineering. And after that, I decided to do my PhD in France. During my PhD, I was mostly interested in security and privacy of software systems. So, for example, let's say if you download a software, let's say your antivirus on your machine, what sort of implications it has on your security and privacy. So, let's say, for example, antivirus may scan all your files, and it may send some information to backend servers, and how that can impact your privacy is something that I was looking into. But also from data structure point of view. So, many of these softwares actually use certain data structures. And some data structures are well known to be sort of prone to security attacks, while others are not. So it was also interesting from me to understand what sort of data structures are actually being used on those software systems. So anyway, I finished my PhD, and then I was looking for around the same time, blockchain and Bitcoin was becoming an interesting topic of research for academics. Because until then, people were obviously excited about blockchains and Bitcoin, but it was more from the developer point of view. So people who were interested about what Bitcoin can do to change the world, they were really interesting. But researchers were still sort of waiting to see what sort of interesting problems could come out of Bitcoin. So that was around the time when I decided to sort of switch over and see if there are some interesting problems to look into Bitcoin. And eventually I started to study privacy in Monero. So that was kind of my first venture into blockchains. I read the white paper of Monero first, then decided to move over to Bitcoin's white paper. And so it was an interesting experience. We published a paper in one of the conferences in security and privacy. And then about that time, I was thinking about what to do next. And this was when my advisor I was back then in Singapore. And my advisor there said, look, he had published a paper on sharding and smart contracts. And he said, look, I want to commercialize this whole project. Would you be interested in joining me? And this is how many of the team members, started to work on this project that eventually became Zilliqa. So my role at Zilliqa is basically at the team level. I'm the president and chief science officer, so I help basically lead the team. Beyond that, as any startup, when you start, you have to do everything from writing the white paper to writing code to managing the community, building the team, and so on. So I've gone through that journey at Zilliqa from day zero. So that's a short intro, rather long intro what I do.
Oh, fantastic! I'll be really interested to talk data structures with you. So Michael, on to you.
Sure. So, my background is kind of the opposite from Amrit. My background is deep in the traditional financial sector. I used to work with Societe Generale and their asset management and private banking and security services custody affiliates globally. So I used to run corporate development for them globally with a specific focus on their US affiliates. So we, at the time, acquired part of the Rockefeller family office, built a private banking business across Canada, uh, built a hedge fund and private equity business kind of globally within Trust Company of the West, and helped to run our Greater China VC focused fund called Asia Vest. Ultimately, with Societe Generale and with Trust Company of the West, we ended up doing a management buyout with Carlyle as a sponsor for Trust Company of the West, and then left from there, and then I went to Alliance Bernstein. So, at TCW, we managed about 250 billion of assets US. At Alliance Bernstein, it was about 600 billion. And while there, again, helped to run the alternatives area. So again, hedge funds, private equity, VC, energy infrastructure. Spent a lot of time really there trying to work on financial inclusion more than anything else. So democratization of access to private equity and to hedge funds. So we created liquid retail hedge funds at the time, which were effectively looking to duplicate the performance of hedge funds, but in the mutual fund market. So again, trying to get people involved in these high alpha generating opportunities that traditionally wouldn't be involved if they were not accredited investors. So was there for a couple of years, and then when I left there at the end of 2015, I kind of jumped headfirst into the fintech, digital asset, blockchain space. And I've worked globally since. So I was in Hong Kong, I was in Estonia, but in 2017, I was in Toronto and founded a company called Ether Capital, which was the first publicly traded Ethereum-focused investment company. So we raised about 50 million and through a reverse takeover took that public in Canada. That company now is about 100 million market cap and is now currently in the news as a sub-advisor on the world's first Bitcoin ETF run by its sister company, Purpose Financial. So I think that raised about 500 million of assets in about a week. So since then, I've been an entrepreneur in the space, but around mid 2019, began talking to the team at Zilliqa and ended up joining them at the beginning of last year in February 2020. Relocated from Los Angeles to Singapore, and my official title within Zilliqa was head of corporate development. So worked pretty closely with Amrit and the rest of the team on commercialization opportunities for the platform, how to think about ways to generate revenues, and how to make good investments off the platform. And in furtherance of that, Amrit and I and kind of the rest of the team decided it made sense to create an ecosystem focused investment company. And so that's what we did. So I'm now the CEO and co-chief investment officer of Zilliqa Capital, which is kind of a permanent capital company, call it like the Berkshire Hathaway of fintech and DeFi, focused in and around the Zilliqa space. And that's kind of what I've been focused on. So still partnering with Amrit and the rest of the team on ways to kind of benefit Zilliqa, the layer one, and then also thinking at the same time about ways to bring additional meaningful funding into the ASEAN and India region for Zilliqa and the products around it.
Yeah, that's very exciting. And what I wanted to disclose to my audience is that, Michael, Amrit, and I are all in discussions with the possibility that I might join the board of Zilliqa Capital. So that is something I should disclose. I guess getting back to kind of Zilliqa as a layer one, what I'd love to do is kind of give you a challenge, right? Which is that, one of the things that is very popular in L1, especially for kind of arbitrary compute and applications, is of course the Ethereum blockchain. You mentioned the Ethereum fund, Michael, that you worked on in the past. So, obviously
Yeah.
Ethereum is a tremendously proficient and robust chain. Layer 2 scalability is coming, and in fact, it's already here in the form of ZK as well as optimistic rollups. Obviously there's gas EIPs coming. So I think that the very common answers of ours is faster, may not be sufficient. So I guess my question would be, what is the differentiation for Zilliqa? And, it's just to give you a little bit of exciting, probably not the first person to ask the question in the history of the world, but, maybe Amrit, maybe you can take a swipe at it.
Sure. So, the main reason why we started Zilliqa was based on this idea of sharding, because we felt that, and this was an idea that we started as our first academic paper. So that was the first paper that was published in academic literature that basically showed to people that you could actually apply this idea of sharding into public blockchains. So until then, it was not known, or it was not well thoroughly studied how to do that in practice. So one very key sort of idea that we started now is something that many people are following. Whether it be, I won't say that Ethereum followed us, but definitely we started that chain reaction where now several chains are actually pursuing that idea of sharding in many different forms and shapes. Some obviously trying to improve upon what we have done. So that's something that obviously gives us an advantage on what we started with. The second area that we've tried to focus on was around smart contract safety. And this is something, again, that many people are doing, but our approach has been, I would say, probably the first or second one in that sense, where we felt that the language, the smart contract language, the way it was designed, especially solidity, was sort of designed with, developer features in mind, not so much on security aspects of it. And what ended up happening was that it became so loose, or it became so open for people to use, that it became very difficult to make sure that any formal guarantees could come out of it. Of course, I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's very, very difficult. And if you could change the language, or if you could restrict the language in some way, it becomes much easier. So basically what we have learned so far is that you basically have a trade-off between how expressive a language can be and how auditable that language could be. So how easy it is to reason about the correctness and safety of that contract. And that's, if you look at, a recent survey made by, I think, Solidity team, one of the most hated, and again, it's one of the most loved aspects as well, is that Solidity is one of the most hated aspects of Solidity is that it's very close to JavaScript. Even though it definitely makes people who actually develop web applications their life much easier. And that's, again, because of some of the guarantees that the language doesn't provide. So we also felt that back then, when we were building Zilliqa and developing Zilliqa, we felt that there is an opportunity to actually build a safer language that could be easy to use, at the same time be able to provide stronger guarantees. And after that, we saw Viper coming in the Ethereum ecosystem. We saw, I think, recently a language called Fei coming. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing the name correctly, but another language called Fei coming up. I think after that, I think Cardano started to work on their own language called Plutus. Algorrand developed their own language. So in a way, that created sort of chain reaction where people felt that this is an area of development that people need to focus on to make a language better, because in the end, many of these contracts actually handle hundreds of $millions worth of assets, even billions of dollars worth of assets. And you want to make sure that those contracts are actually indeed safe to hold that. So these are two sort of key areas which we started with. Again, that has created a lot of different tentacles. One, I won't claim that we have changed and impacted other people, but we have definitely seen that other people have actually started to work on similar lines as well. So that I feel that there's some contribution that we have made to the blockchain ecosystem.
Yeah, I think that what you're noting, I think that is a valuable insight and very deep philosophically, is essentially that freedom isn't free, right? And I know it's silly for me to say such an abstract thing, but what I'm really trying to drive at is that, you're talking about this kind of like property of Turing completeness, right? You're talking about the property of essentially having an infinite surface area, right? So an infinite surface area becomes an infinite attack surface for exploitation and hacking, right? So obviously constraint models can produce much in the way that like a constraint of a poetic form can produce more creative solutions and more beautiful poetry. It's free. If you look at the history of poetry, free verse doesn't necessarily win, right? As the kind of dominant form of poetry that everyone enjoys, right? So I think, there is an idea that a constraint can create meaning. There are other sort of players attacking in this region, of course, as you do know. My fund is invested in a effort called Agoric, and they actually are based not on, like Solidity, not based on JavaScript, but in fact are using JavaScript itself as the base language, but they're adding abstraction layers, including role-based security and authentications. They're adding abstractions that enable you to form better expressiveness that's more constrained by the security requirements of the application layer. So I think that's very exciting. So I think the next question might, kind of head towards Michael, which is more of like an ecosystem question, right? I think you're thinking about an ecosystem fund and investment. So like from my perspective, I'd love to hear from you about sort of what are the killer applications, right? Because obviously one of the most important things to try to understand is optimally, how do you see the build out of an ecosystem on top of this particularly novel language construct?
Sure. So from my side, there's a couple things that we're looking to achieve, from a DeFi or OpenFi perspective. And first and foremost of that is making sure that we have everything properly laid out, from blockchain layer, usability layer, infrastructure layer, and application layer. And if you look at some of the things we've invested in already out of our kind of our acceleration fund internally, some of the killer apps I'd say would be companies like Unstoppable Domains, which is kind of a domain registry platform that enables developers to build uncensorable websites. We came in very early there with north of 10x returns on our investment, and then subsequent to that, Draper came in to invest there. Switcheo is another major one. It's a DEX, decentralized exchange, that we've been working closely with. We've seen 6x returns on that. And that's something that Three Arrows, another major fund here in Singapore, came into afterwards. And even extending outside of the DeFi, OpenFi area into NFTs and gaming, one of the companies that we work very closely with is a company called Mintable. And they just saw some funding come in from Mark Cuban. So, for us, it's not necessarily trying to be ahead of the curve with folks. It's more about building something that makes sense. If you look at ASEAN and India specifically, there are tremendous numbers of unbanked and underbanked. And part of what we are looking to achieve is building the infrastructure for them to be better served. And whether that's through payments, remittances, lending, insurance, or investments, those are all angles that I think we can capitalize on. If you look here in Singapore specifically, with our partner XFers, we have the first Singapore dollar stablecoin that's been out and about, and we're working on other projects with them in the region. The same goes for security token exchange, where our partner is here in HGX, which is one of the first active token exchanges globally, and especially here in Singapore. So for us, it's really about building this ecosystem that can allow for the development, allow for the build out of things that contribute to the broader decentralized financial space. And we've seen those opportunities globally. We've made investments here in the region. We've made investments in Europe, US, et cetera. And that's the thing. It's a global economy. And that's one of the great things about the team at Zilliqa is it's really a global team as well. So while we are based here in Singapore, we have kind of a real global perspective on things and a very open-minded and entrepreneurial way of collaborating and doing things.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a very balanced and nuanced answer. I think one of my early hits was working at the Sun Microsystems with the Java team. And we actually worked very closely with Kleiner Perkins on the Java Fund, which is a venture fund vehicle to promote developers, so-called independent software vendors on top of the Java platform and language. So, my kind of understanding and appreciation for the power of capital to enable platform expansion is very, I definitely appreciate what you're saying. And I think that there is an element that you alluded to, obviously you were talking about the global nature of it, but I also think that there is a regional nature as well. So being headquartered in Singapore, it does provide sort of profound access to economic opportunity in the region particularly in the Asian South region. And of course, you're an incredibly global group of individuals and players. But, my fund is co-invested with you in Zanpool, which is a very powerful payments solution provider. And, we're very proud of their economic results. They're absolutely doing a wonderful job, and they're doing a nice job connecting as well with the kind of fundamental economic propositions that are needed in these emerging markets, right? So in a sense, like they're fairly indigenous with respect to how they interact with emerging markets, right? So the product market fit it's not generic, it's very specific, and they're going country by country. So I definitely understand. So I think there's a regional play to be made for sure. I do think the existence of capital is exciting to be sure. I think maybe back to Amrit, I'd love to kind of zoom in more narrowly, right? Because I think that, like, obviously from a capital perspective, the easiest playbook in the world is to kind of build an alternative, right? So to build essentially a DEX provider and AMM, and to build like basically everything you see in DeFi on Ethereum, you can just build on Zilliqa and probably do it economically, right? But I guess I would say that the question that I would have is more like, what are kind of platform optimized applications that you can envision, and obviously, like, from a general perspective, you can say like a more secure anything you see on Ethereum, but I think that's a bit of a cop out. Like I'd love to, and obviously like finance requires security, but I'm trying to get more of a vibe, and any examples that you might have of like clever ways in which the technology platform enables applications that would otherwise be probably exceedingly difficult. Is probably the better way of looking at it. Impossible, like nothing's impossible. It's more just economically impractical. So how do you confer advantage, and do you have any examples of that?
Yeah, I mean, there are different ways in which certain layer could have an advantage over another layer, depending on what sort of, let's say, basic consensus mechanism they use. For example, let's say if someone is, let's say, again, depending on how they implement this layer. Imagine, for example, you have a network that implements state sharding. And because of the fact that shard only controls and holds the state of a specific state, contracts, not the other contracts, not the other. So the state's basically confined within a given shard. It basically gives you it puts certain limitations on what you can do with state sharding.
Yes.
For example, in certain designs, you actually have to do asynchronous calls.
Yep.
And which means that if I'm a user and if I'm sending a transaction, I basically have to sometimes in certain designs where you have to basically lock the state of a contract, and then wait for that lock to be released to be able to process something else. And that basically puts a constraint on the user side. In certain designs, user has to send 5 transactions to be able to process.
It limits composability in some cases.
Exactly. So there are all sorts of depending on how what sort of underlying technology is, and how that engineering part is implemented. It can also impose certain restrictions on sort of what sort of applications you can run and why certain applications cannot be run in a user-friendly manner. That I definitely believe that, and this is exactly why when we implement sharding, we felt that we should try to approach in a way where state is almost everywhere. So you don't have to worry about, oh, my contract is here and I have to talk to some other contract which doesn't exist in my shard. So we want to make sure that the sort of contracts sort of spread everywhere, so that you don't have to worry about finding the state of a certain contract that doesn't exist in your shard.
Yes.
The other thing that we felt would be important, and this is something that we are doing uniquely in some sense, is that all the chains that today are looking towards sharding, including Ethereum, they're all looking from the system perspective. So for example, how can we design our consensus mechanism, or how can we design a roll-up mechanism to be able to process certain things in a certain way? So most of these is at the network layer. We felt that there could be something to be done at the language layer itself. For example, if you write your contract in a way that it becomes shardable, or certain contracts are by default shardable, but other contracts are not that much.
Yeah.
So it also makes when you do that, it makes your transaction processing ability much
Yeah,
better.
yeah, yeah. I totally get this. This is very valuable, right? Because, for example, one of the things that resulted in the existence of the Flow blockchain, right? So, when you look at the work that's been done at Dapper Labs with Roham and Mick and his team over there, they very much learned through the experience of NFT CryptoKitties. They learned that Ethereum and Ethereum sharding was going to potentially in the future produce more complexity with respect to kind of the transaction boundary and the application design, right? So in a sense, having abstractions in the language construct that enable you to specify then enables you to have much more power and flexibility, so you can kind of optimize for performance with shardability using kind of almost a stateless architecture, or you can kind of hybridize, or you could go with the stateful architecture, right, and opt for kind of less sharding and maybe possibly less performance, but in a way that becomes a design aesthetic. So I definitely see that as a powerful set of design decisions and a way of surfacing the power at the developer layer, which I think is very astute. So I definitely this is such an interesting conversation to have, right? Because I think in a way there's so much technical power, and then there's also so much financial power, so you guys are a great dream team, from that perspective, and it's fun because in a way I'm kind of a DeFi head. I'm definitely excited about both elements, right? So I'd love to kind of kick it over, I think, Michael, what's your perspective in terms of how do you sort of, how do you see the interaction with the technical advantages of the underlying platform, and how do you see kind of the process of the developer ecosystem, from a fund manager perspective, right? Because obviously, one of the funny things about that perspective is that different ecosystem funds have different rules, right? Like there are some ecosystem funds that are much more liberal and they can invest in anything, right? And they some of the rules that they apply are things like, like if you can just sign this non-binding MOU that you're going to integrate with our chain eventually, then here's the money, right? That's one approach, right? The other approach to that is more like, we want you to ship on our platform first, and then we'll give you some money, so it almost becomes more like a pure play, ecosystem development fund, oftentimes that kind of comes either off the balance sheet or off the token of the project itself. So I guess I'd love to hear your philosophy, right? Because I think that, typical kind of LP-driven funds kind of have a passion for investing in things that will grow, and maybe a little less of a passion for, things that will help the mothership, right? So I guess I'm trying to figure out your perspectives on this tension.
Sure. So, when you look at what we're focused on, I mean, first of all, we're blessed to have a vibrant Zilliqa community of developers and folks that are truly interested in the growth of what we've been doing. You can see them quite active on social media. You can see them in the interactions with our team on the technological side and on the business side. And even in the way that current projects have grown, Switcheo, Zanpool, Xfers, et cetera, it's not uncommon to see us working side by side with these guys, helping them work through solutions to challenges that they have. And that's one of the things I think that stands out about us as a protocol and us as a team, is that we're willing to roll up our sleeves side by side with them. That said, there are multiple protocols globally, and some of them solve problems that others don't, and others have ideas that resolve things that others do. But for us, one of the things, again, that you see us is we're very pragmatic and not dogmatic about how things are. We don't need majority control of a company to invest with it. And we don't need them to 100% do only everything exclusive with Zilliqa. So that we know that there's a lot of cross-chain functionality that's either here or coming down the pike. We're working on our own Zil ETH bridge within itself. Great. Because still, to your earlier point, Ethereum is still where 90% plus of the dApps are developed. When I helped found Ether Capital, was 96%
Sure.
of the dApps at the time.
Yep.
And even with all the pros and cons, there's a lot of development across the board. So for us, it's really about finding good, solid teams, folks that are really building out the right solutions for decentralized finance, for financial inclusion, for really helping to bring these solutions about. And then it comes down to, is there an opportunity for us as a technological team at Zilliqa Protocol to collaborate with those people and put something together that's meaningful? From an investment perspective, we are flexible in terms of revenue sharing or profit sharing or equity or tokens. At the end of the day, it's just we want to make sure that there's relative and relevant skin in the game that provides both near-term value and then kind of longer tail value. So that's kind of how looking at it from a very macro top-down perspective. But again, if we meet with some folks that are just starting up, but they have a brilliant idea, and we know that integration with Zilliqa may be 1 year down the line or 2 years down the line, it doesn't mean that we'll say, no, we're not ready to work with you yet. What we know is that, look, we want to help these people be successful and make sure that at the same time we're collaborating with them to facilitate going to Zilliqa or working with us in addition to any other chain. Because I don't necessarily think there's going to be one chain that rules them all. But at the end of the day, it's making sure that you have the right pipes and the right rails in place to deliver solutions to the community. And for us, having a pretty vibrant community within Zilliqa, being located here in Singapore with a strong roots in Southeast Asia and ASEAN and India, we think that that's a perfect place, and we think that's a perfect philosophy, and that's why we really work well. So when you look at us, we're certainly, like I said earlier, we're looking to be really pragmatic about how we invest in things, how we collaborate with folks, and then ultimately look to build and add value across the space.
That's in some ways that kind of pragmatism is really it's very healthy, and it's so interesting, right? Because when I see a couple of Zilliqa Capital co-founders like yourselves, in a way, ideally there's sort of a kind of a McCartney-Lennon thing going on, or a Jobs-Wozniak thing going on, where there's ideally, and in a way, it's a way of bridging what I call heaven and earth, right? Which is that, in a sense, I once gave a talk in front of a group of developers that was called "Technology is Beautiful, but business is stupid," right? And like the mood is that there is a healthy pragmatism that comes from business, right? And I think the thing that I think people may misunderstand is that DeFi has actually kind of moved into a phase of pragmatism and not purism, right? And when I even say that, I'm talking about Ethereum DeFi, right? So people think and misunderstand Ethereum to be a bunch of purists, and I think it makes sense that they misunderstand it, right? Because when you look at the beautiful Ethereum logo, it's like the perfect geometry, and it's sort of this very cosmic kind of form, and it's fully transparent, and it has all these qualities, right? And so people misunderstand it. But the thing that's incredibly true is that there's so many dependencies in DeFi on things like price oracles, right? And everybody understands that a price oracle is not on chain. There's no hard on chain proof of the price, right? So there's only slashing and staking and all these other kind of really complicated human social mechanics, because they're just doing business, right? So in a sense, the business pragmatism is where heaven kind of touches the earth and kind of actually manages to get their hands dirty, right? So it's not about purism, it's about kind of pragmatism. So I appreciate that tone. I mean, Amrit, do you agree as a technologist?
I agree. There's always been, if you talk to many people in the world, blockchain space today, they will say Ethereum is a protocol, Zilliqa is a protocol. They are not businesses.
Yes.
I heard someone one day saying that, we provide you something, you build businesses out of it. But in a way, that protocol has to be sustained. You need to be able to support that
Yes.
ecosystem, and that requires money, that requires capital.
Yeah.
And so in a way, and today, most, if you go back, I don't know, maybe 2 years ago or 3 years ago, most dApps were not we consider as fun projects. Today dApps are not just fun projects. They are actually real businesses
Yes.
because they are making money,
Yes.
and that
Yes.
money sustains, a considerable sum of money every month. And so saying that we are just a protocol and we enable X, Y, and Z, that's not a strong argument, because
Okay, I dig it.
I'm not sure I fully believe in that argument. Yes, we are, we provide a platform layer, but in the end, we are supporting a lot of ecosystems, and we are supporting a lot of economies, and that cannot just be that.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
it's great because, like, it's nice to hear that from your side as well, right? Because the thing that is always so interesting is that dynamic tension between, I think if you read the book, if you read Plato's Republic, like, he really started to expound upon the idea of these ideals, right? These perfect, untouchable, formless, unmanifest images, right? So, in a sense, he created object-oriented programming, right? Because he created the perfect kind of class of like a horse, of which all real horses are kind of inherent, right? They're all kind of they're all instances. They're all instances of this kind of like abstract, perfect, canonical horse, right? And so, but the thing that's so funny is that the real horses have injuries. They have like they're all kind of like these funny living creatures with their properties, right? So I think that tension is very vital. It's a very important tension, right? Because when I invest as a VC, I want to see heaven and earth, right? Like, I want to see this brilliant future of perfection and these unicorns, but I also want to hear about like how grindingly hard it is right now, and like how you're delivering something that people value, and sometimes what you're delivering is kind of, I don't know, like weird or comical or strange or kind of, just messy, right? Like so I think that's the balance.
Yeah, it's not just an algorithm anymore. It's not just a protocol anymore. I think there's much more to it.
Yeah, Michael,
Yeah.
jump in.
I think that's right, and that's also kind of that same thought of the heaven and earth, and in kind of the friction and tension is what drives us to assemble the team at Zilliqa Capital. Certainly between the two of us, Amrit and I, we both come. Amrit comes from the technological background, I come from the financial background, but we've crossed over at multiple points over time, and it creates kind of a really great dynamic for the two of us. But above and beyond that, you look at the team on the board and the folks that we've assembled there, from people such as you, who clearly you can balance both worlds, and you're very thoughtful about the things that you do. You look at Jaehan Chu, who we have a table from Kinetic Capital in Hong Kong. Ben Tsai, a guy I actually used to work with at Alliance Bernstein, so he's another kind of classic financial guy who crossed over, and now he's managing partner and president of Wave Financial, and they recently tokenized, I think, about 600 million of whiskey in Japan, which again, real world applications of things that we deal with. And then we have Nishal Shetty, who's the CEO of WazirX, India's largest crypto exchange and a Binance subsidiary. And then Professor David Lee from here in Singapore, one of the thought leaders in blockchain from Singapore University of Social Sciences, and then Mason Borda, the CEO of TokenSoft, which is affiliated with Coinbase. So all these people, they're entrepreneurs, they're innovators, they're technologists in multiple ways, and I think that friction will certainly help us as we're being thoughtful about what to invest in and how we look to build out the ecosystem.
Yeah, I think that this kind of creative tension is incredibly valuable. Absolutely, as I described, kind of the Jobs-Wozniak relationship, or like oftentimes in those historical stories, you have Steve Jobs making promises, and then you have Steve Wozniak kind of in these very uncomfortable situations. It's like, oh, I've made a contract for a single player Pong, with Nolan Bushnell from Atari, and now I hope you can deliver the demo by Monday. These kind of like incredible stories, and obviously with McCartney and Lennon, you see these incredible tensions where in some ways their songwriting became almost about outdoing one another. So it was definitely like a real tension, and to me, I think those tensions, as long as there maintains kind of this this mutual respect and this kind of desires. I think that that's really where the rubber meets the road, supposedly, right? Or I don't know if those are the right metaphors, but
no, I think that's right. And even, like one of the other folks on our board is Jiho Zerlin, one of the co-founders of Sky Mavis, Axie Infinity, and with the growth of NFT and gaming as well. It's kind of this whole balance, to your point about Wozniak coming up with an idea and Jobs saying, okay, now make it work. We feel there's a great group around the table, and Amrit is very entrepreneurial thinking with the technology hat on, and I think it's just a great team all around and a great protocol.
Well, I think the thing that made the Job Wozniak thing amazing is that there was such strength on both sides, right? Because the thing that's so interesting when I talk about heaven and earth, right, which is that heaven is very pure and the technology is very pure, but the thing that's so funny about Steve Jobs is that he did both himself, right? In the sense of he was not a hardcore technologist, but his visions were very giant. Like he was not kind of just a hustler. Like he was a real visionary, and of course that made life very difficult for everyone around him, but it worked. Yeah, it was very, so that's interesting. He's a very demanding person. So in terms of kind of speaking of I'm a very big proponent of this idea, like the big idea, right? So I'd love to kind of get, each of you to kind of express sort of the vision that you have, and think about it in this kind of multi-decade time course. Like what are you kind of interested in and willing to contribute decades towards, the realization of?
I mean, from my angle, I definitely would like to see, I don't think in terms of platform layer, I don't think none of the chains today, I mean, maybe some may claim to be so, I think we are quite far from, you could say, to be able to provide people the right technology and easy. I mean, today, if you talk to anyone, you have to tell them how blockchain works before they actually can even use any of these systems. When I was doing research, people have done tons of research on removing passwords because researchers have wanted to get rid of passwords for a long time. And they couldn't because they knew that it's going to be very painful for people to get rid of passwords. And today we have ended up in a world where there's no passwords and you end up handling private and public keys. And we are seeing that conflict today where you see when you remove password, people now actually see the sort of challenge that regular folks who don't even understand what a public key is, they have to know how to manage those keys. Every other day you see scams. Again, you could call these people, I don't know, not smart enough to not handle private keys, but that expecting people to really understand a public key and private keys is too much.
Yes.
And asking people to say, understand how blockchain works is like asking anyone today how AWS handles your website. It's not reasonable to ask those questions to your users. And I think DeFi in a way has made it even more difficult. In that sense, there's so much of lingo that people have to understand. Of course, people do see that, you don't have to put your money into your bank account. You can take that money out and put that into DeFi, AMMs or, yield generating products. But in order to be able to participate in those systems, it's very, very hard. It's very hard, even for new people, even for people who know what they're doing, it still requires them to actually go and read documentations. When I download an app from App Store, I don't read how to use Facebook app, but people do. DeFi application users actually have to read manuals and docs. And I think we are far from a point where we could say very easily that here's an app that you can easily go and download from App Store, and you'd be able to use that app without worrying about any lingo at all. And the technology has to improve to a point where it goes in the background. And you don't even see that blockchain is being used behind the scenes. And I don't think we are quite there yet.
Nice. So much like Steve Jobs extolled the virtues of personal computing, it sounds like you're extolling the virtues of personal blockchaining. Nice. I like it. I like it. Michael, your grand picture vision?
So for me, it's more mission driven than anything else. I'm a big proponent of democratization of access and financial inclusion. Since my days back at AllianceBernstein and to other ventures I've been in, and certainly here. So, being here in the ASEAN region, with India in the background, and a certainly large player in the space, you see such large numbers of unbanked and underbanked. And so for us, what I'd like to achieve from a big picture is being able to deliver solutions that really help people be active and live their best life, from a financial perspective, from a gaming perspective, from anything. So you're kind of building on Amrit's personal blockchainification, if you want to take it that way. For me, it's really about financial inclusion, getting people involved that aren't, and being able to have a seat at the table. And then the same goes for investors with us, making sure that those folks and people in our community, are participating with us, in the benefits that we're doing as we're growing good investments and growing the ecosystem. So for me, financial inclusion drives both ways. It's one, helping folks get access to products and an ecosystem that they don't currently have access to, and democratization of that access. But then secondarily, from an investing perspective, making sure that we're sharing, the benefits of good investments with our investors. And that's kind of the dual-sidedness of kind of what I'd like to achieve from a macro perspective and a big picture.
Oh, it's wonderful. And to me, it definitely deeply resonates because for me, wealth inequality is a economic externality. It certainly is kind of a cost that's borne by the financially disenfranchised, and obviously they didn't consent to enter into such a construct, right? It's just that the network effects have played against a certain group and they kind of remain disenfranchised, disincentivized, disintermediated. They generally end up being dissed. So like I would say that the thing that I'd love to kind of share with you, and this is obviously something we can get into more detail after the show, is one of our portfolio companies at Gumi Crypto's Capital is YGG, Yield Guild Gaming, which is actually a guild that is in the DeFi and NFT space. It's based in the Philippines, and they actually operate in the play to earn ecosystem. And what you actually have is you have people who used to drive Grab taxi like Uber, except now they're driving NFTs. And so it's a fascinating thing. People are gaining their families' livelihoods, effectively by playing Axie Infinity and similar games. So, I think Jihos, other kind of ZC board member that you talked about, would also vouch for this company. And, I think they have a very bright and exciting future. So it's called YGG, Yield Guild Games. And I have a very nice episode of my show, Miko Bits Show, dedicated to Gabby, the founder of YGG, who's a terrific serial entrepreneur in the Philippines. So I think there's a regional play, there's an NFT play, there's a whole bunch of elements in it for you, I think, and they're chain agnostic, so I think they could certainly benefit from what you've described. So so happy to talk about things and opportunities like that, and we can definitely,
which is fantastic. I mean, that's the network effect, and that's certainly right in the bailiwick of what we're looking for and that our community is interested in.
Yeah, so, hugely powerful network effects. And that and the thing that we love about that is that the product market fit use case, it could not be more compelling, right? Which is, there's so many stories that come out, like people joined Axie Infinity, they're now making more money than they made driving Grab taxi, in Indonesia or in the Philippines. Those are the major player bases they have for play to earn. And then the thing that is fascinating is that they received massive economic stimulus from the Uniswap airdrop, right? Because they were using Uniswap to convert the Axie SLP token into Ethereum and USDC, and eventually off-ramping to Indonesia rupiah or to Philippine peso. So like it's really interesting, because of their use of Uniswap, suddenly they got an airdrop that was larger than the U.S. proposed stimulus check. And if they didn't sell it, it would be worth 10 times that today. So like, life-changing money. Like, in the Philippines, if you're a former Grab taxi driver, that is life-changing money. Like that is epic life-changing money. So I think these are wonderful use cases, and I think your description of a desire to contribute to financial inclusion, I think, is absolutely not misplaced. Because for me, when you look at open source software is the competition for consent. So really, everything is consent based. And if you really don't like it, you can just fork it and go somewhere else, right? So to me, like, everyone who's participating as a beneficiary in open source is doing so on their consent, right? So we're going to have a much more consensual financial system, and inclusion is just like a necessary and obvious side effect, right? Which is that inclusion is just part and parcel of consent, right? Which is people will just they're just going to use whatever thing serves them the best, right? And they deserve that. And every system should compete for that consent. They should all compete and try to be the best system with the lowest prices and the best features and the best applications, the best ecosystems, and if they can attain those goals, then they deserve to exist and they deserve to continue serving the world.
I agree.
Yeah, wonderful. It's a great vision. So I guess this one might be an Amrit question, which is kind of Zilliqa roadmap, right? So I'd love to kind of get any kind of upcoming milestones, any kind of technical updates, any improvement proposals. What should we look forward to?
Yeah, so we launched our mainnet in 2019. So roughly speaking, the platform is around 2-3 years old.
Yeah.
Now we are at a stage where we have sort of different levels of technical work that we have to do. One is to make sure that the platform keeps improving, because when you launch some software, it never stops. So you need to make sure that keeps on improving. So for example, one of the key work that we're looking at, something that I'm personally very excited about, is we recently published a paper at a conference called PLDI, Programming Language Design and Implementation, where the idea was to be able to sort of determine a way through a static analysis that certain contracts can have properties that would make them more shardable than other contracts. And then what we end up doing is, if you look at most contracts today, the way it works is that in a sharded architecture, the way mostly it works is that you have a shard, you have a contract that basically sits in one shard, and all transactions destined to that shard destined to that contract goes to that shard. So basically, one contract, all transactions coming to that contract will always get handled in one single shard.
Mm-hmm.
So what we felt that maybe one way to sort of optimize this is to be able to actually deploy the same contract in multiple shards. And then different users could send transactions to different shards, but to the same contract, and yet be able to process transaction parallel. So in the previous model, let's say, Miko, you send a transaction, I send a transaction to transfer, let's say, USDT tokens. Both these transactions would go to the same shard, but now you could actually send in parallel to different shards and be able to process transaction parallel. So this is something that we felt that, again, you need to be able to identify those contracts and those certain properties that the contracts may have to be able to do that. So we have published a paper on this, and then now we are looking into sort of implementing that idea. Again, this is one example of an optimization that we would like to do to be able to improve throughput and lower latency. We have also so far have implemented only what I call the interpreter of the language. So we have the smart contract language, and we have an interpreter that interprets that language. And now we are looking into, obviously, as you can imagine, interpreters are much slower compared to compilers. So we are now looking into actually building a virtual machine that will be backed by LLVM, which will hopefully increase the processing time of smart contract by at least 10x.
Well, and I think our experience with the Java platform does demonstrate that there is a mechanism of bytecode intermediated JIT compilation that can actually outperform, right? So ultimately, you can outperform on an interpreted language, which is something that really pisses off people to hear, but it actually turns out to be true, right? That an interpreted language can outperform a hard-coded binary language, right? Which should not be the case, but it turns out that machines are actually pretty good at optimizing execution flow. So this has been an absolutely wonderful episode. I'm very happy to have this call with you guys, and let's wrap the show here. Where should people go to find out more about Zilliqa?
Well, we have our website. Most of our team members, including myself, we are very active on Twitter as anyone in the crypto world. Feel free to ping us, and then we would love to answer any questions that you may have.
Yeah, fantastic.
So Zilliqa.com for the protocol, and then ZilliqaCapital.com for the capital entity.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
If you need money, you need to go to Michael.
Yes, that I like. That I like. Okay, well, I appreciate it, and thanks very much. Great episode.
Thanks, Miko.
Thank you very much, Miko.
Thank you. Bye.